Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to another week of Outer Space. Right now, my guest cannot see the background. I took pride in putting this background together. I'll show it to you later. Today, we've got a very, very special guest with us. A guest who I've been waiting to have for some time, and then you guys will probably figure it out as we go on as to why I've been waiting for her to come on. So today we've got I won't say infamous, but let me say the wise, the wonderful, W word, W adjectives. Kabali Kagwa. Kabali Kagwa. Am I saying that correctly?
Close enough. You're doing well.
Thank you. You know what? So let me explain. Let me explain because a lot of let me say a lot of people who can't speak vernacular languages, right? Tend to try to pronounce. How do I say your name? So the reason why I take pride in that is not because I'm not trying to emulate them or imitate them, but it's more of my name is Neo, and my whole life I've always had three pronunciations of my name. My name is spelled three ways, but it's always Neo, 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 even New. That one it exists. So I mean, it doesn't really bother me that much, to be honest, because I got so used to it. But as the older I got, the more I realized that there's a pride, there's an identity, there's a DNA behind your name, there's a character behind your name, and it's important. Something that your parents had provided to you or gave to you, and it's something you should take in pride and live by. So that's why I always try my best to really get to know how to pronounce people's names properly on my side as well. Just a little sweet intro. But how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Funnily enough, feeling hella creative under lockdown. Not seeing people has been great
Oh
for
yeah,
me personally.
likewise.
Uh, so I'm actually doing quite well. How about you? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I think you're not the first person to say that. A lot of creatives have been very thankful for this time. I've just heard people who are creatives really explore themselves, further define themselves, refine themselves, and find themselves essentially in this time. So I've also had that journey. I had more time to meditate. Ironically, being away from work has had its challenges, but I think what it's done, the extra time that you really get in small pockets that you don't really see, it gives you a lot more time to really be yourself. For me, I know obviously doesn't have that benefit as well, but I mean, like that's my experience during this time. So I'm tired, not fatigued, tired, but I'm pretty good.
Yeah, I 100% feel you about just like um feeling more like yourself. Like I'm a people person and that's usually where I draw my energy from. But I didn't realize how much I was expending, like having to see people or even at work, this idea of like performing productivity or performing some kind of like I'm here, I'm active, I'm happy. Um and so I've flourished not having to meet those expectations. However, I've missed
Yeah,
my commute. I won't lie, because my commute was long. It was 40 minutes to an hour to work and 40 minutes to an hour back. And that meant that I could listen to my podcast in the car, but it also
yeah,
meant that I
yeah,
could transition. It, I don't know if you've had the thing of transitioning. So like you leave your house and then you can think about all your things and then you kind of like enter work mode and then you work. And then I had like a decompression moving out of work and
yeah,
back into home.
100%. That was me with
Yeah.
gym, with the commute between home and work. So those small little things, even going to my bass guitar lessons once a week, those small things where I realize that now the boundaries in my life have almost disappeared. So it's almost like I have to draw a line. It's like that's your line, that's my line. That's where. But then it's just chalk drawn on the ground. So it can rain, it can disappear, and then sometimes it's 7 p.m. and you're still like, oh wow. I mean, today I was surprised. I'm like, I was saying I need to tell somebody to get back to me by the end of the week, and they're like, dude, tomorrow's the end of the week. I'm like, ah, yeah. Whoops, I forgot about that. So a lot of my boundaries have been, become a lot more dim. So I don't see a lot of things. So it's now really about more self control, more than it was before for me personally. It's freaking wild.
Self control.
Yeah, let's not even go there because I have none. I try. I'm getting better. I must admit I'm getting better. If I have to analyze myself between now, 5 years ago, now 10 years ago, which I don't really do, but I'll do like in 2 second thoughts. I'm like, you learned something in that time. Well done to you, man. Good on you.
I, I think what I've been telling people is like, um, you have to find what motivates you, and then not feel guilty about it. So
100%.
I know that like gym, and I find it easier to be accountable to other people than I am to myself. Like
Yeah,
um
same.
and that is not a great habit, but trying to mold myself into something else hasn't is not helpful. So the thing is, like if I gym by myself, I'm so self-conscious, and I get into my head too much. But
Mhm.
having a trainer, I don't think about it as much. And because we have a set time, I'm paying that person, I can be there. Like I'm good at showing up. That's me. Like as a friend, if you ask me to show up for you, I will show up, and I'll
Yeah,
be there on time, and I'll do those things. But like if you ask me, like, Faye, do this for you, that doesn't motivate me. I know other people that motivates them. They're like, I'm doing this for myself. I'm like, nah, sleep is good. But if you tell me you signed up for that class, you need to make it, I will 100% be there. So
that's absolutely. Yeah, I'm the same. I
yeah.
think I think the only difference between you and I, maybe in that essence, is that um, I think maybe there's a lack of self control in that. 'Cause sometimes I'll overextend myself, but I'm a real energy person. Like I absorb people's energy so easily to the point of detriment at times. So a lot of the times I don't realize that I've taken on so much of someone's negative energy until I'm down. Like the bad part has already happened. I was moody. I was this happened. Oh, everything was going down. I'm like, why am I like this? And then someone's like, "Yo, my life." And I'm like, "Damn, I've been around this person. I've been taking their energy the whole time. That's why I'm feeling like this." And then I'll put some space between myself and them, and then I feel a little bit. I'm like, "Yeah, this isn't great." And it's something that I struggle to control. The only way I can control it thus far is really just pushing myself away from people. So I'll be like, "Okay, I need space from you," because I just can't not absorb what you have. It's just in my DNA, and it's annoying. That's very annoying. But I think wow, people because this show interesting. Outer space. People don't know the people who come on. Like I generally some of the people will know me and they'll be like, "But who are you talking to?" Because I normally have like I've met people and I have a large array of friends from different places who haven't really even met each other at all. So I think maybe just to bring it home for some of the guests, for me, you are one of those people who your my first impression of you still stands like it hasn't faded. And it's odd because generally I don't necessarily only believe in first impressions. It can happen, but a lot of the time someone's first 1 to 5 impressions is where it's like, okay, I kind of, for you, the first impression I had the first time I met you, like I don't necessarily remember the details, but I remember how I felt. I was like, man, this person's got some potent energy, man. Like the energy, I was like, the force in this one is definitely strong. Can you actually remember like the fabled night that we met? I believe it was through our mutual friend Dennis, right?
Yeah, I think you were in Cape Town for like the first time, and you were just hanging out at his crib. Um, I think,
Yeah, it was like a bride, right?
and I think you. Yeah, it was a chilled evening, not too many friends. I seem to remember a balcony, but I could be wrong.
No, no, there was definitely a
And
balcony. I remember that. But I think
and
my takeaway from that evening was I have and still do, but not as much. But I have complained about the conversations young black people have in social settings quite often. So that evening for
mhm,
me was very memorable, even though some of the details are very blurry, ironically. But the feeling I had that evening was very strong because I was like, man, even if I disagreed with what some of the people were saying or people disagree with what I was saying, the conversation that I was had there was a necessary one. Because
mhm,
for me personally, from a personal development perspective, from an experience perspective, and also just just being able to not just talk about what's happening on TV at a Bri, you know, we, we're tired of what's
yeah,
happening on social media. Like we keep making commentary in a world that doesn't really exist. So to speak to real matters, I remember us speaking about what's happening in the political environment here, what people or what the youth should really be doing, what each person believes that they should what they do, what we should be doing as the youth. And it was very like constructive conversation, and I was like, this is a proud moment for me because these are the conversations we should be having more in social settings. Because we always say, yeah, but in social settings we're supposed to relax, but then where else do we have them?
that's true. I mean, yeah, I think that particular friend group, but also how I tend to live anyway, is like it's like go deep or go home,
Haha, yes.
or I don't know. I just think that like we don't have to dumb ourselves down in order to be likable. But
Yeah.
that being said, like I'm still nearly 30 watching cartoons religiously. Like that's what I do every day. That is a ritual, and it is a ritual that will stick with me.
Man, your
Um,
Mondays.
right? I find them deep though. I think that they touch really, interesting. Um, they tell interesting stories, and I can relate to them more than I can relate to people. So I also don't. I don't think that like the what you're talking about. I don't think that content is. I don't think things like that are considered childish are necessarily a reflection of how complex or how intellectual conversations can be. Um, maybe also because I work. Um, well, my job for the past 5 years, I've worked as an arts coordinator for a theatre organization that specializes in theatre for children and young people. So really getting theatre makers and theatre makers and playwrights and actors to create work for children. But in order to do that, you need to take children seriously. And one of the things that my director is always talking about is that people need to specify the age group because people will say it's for everyone. And she's always like, there's a difference between a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old. There's like a very specific experiences that like 10-year-olds are going through that 15-year-olds are not going through. So when you take that seriously and really try to like unpack childhood, then there are an array of different like experiences and conversations and stuff that can be unearthed. And also just realizing, when did your life become complicated? It didn't become like complicated when you became an adult necessarily.
Mm.
Like there were kids in your class who at like 7 years old were dealing with who are dealing with parents who are divorced, or they were dealing with maybe an older sibling or a cousin who maybe had like suicide ideation, or they were dealing like those things happen. It's not like they only happen when you're 16 and you're ready for them. They happen in your
No.
they happen in your family and you're aware of them. And so their lived experience, for example, that like 4-year-olds have that you might not have now at your big age.
100%. And maybe something I want to, and I want to be careful of how I address this, because I don't want to make it seem I'm undermining a profession. No sarcasm for anyone who misreads. This is no sarcasm at all. Um, so I mean, I've had a conversation with the teacher, an educator, sorry, an educator, and
Mhm.
it was a long debate. But the one part I want to bring in relation to what you said was we're talking about. I was debating the lack of genuine African history in our education system prior to grade 10, so grade 9 and below. So
Right.
there was something this person said. They were talking to how we have to be careful of the psychological readiness of kids. So they gave an example of, would you teach a grade 7 or grade 6 about Marikana? But then I was like, but don't they teach us about, like, not maybe in depth, they teach us about apartheid, they teach us about World War, they teach us about all these things that were very gruesome, they were very traumatic, they were world defining. So I mean, what how do we say that, how do you say that, for example, the readiness of a grade 7 is not ready to maybe digest this. So and maybe where we could dive deeper a little into that to bring back to it, to bring it home to what you're saying is that, maybe what I didn't say in that conversation as well is that you can, what's the word I'm looking for? Not dilute, there we go, is dilute the content in a digestible form, for younger ages. So you're talking about, specifying specific age groups. For example, you're right, but so something that an environment, a home environment that a 19-year-old versus a 8-year old is probably the same. If they're in an abusive household, for example, the father's beating the mother, and they also beats the children. The household is the same, the environment is the same, what they're exposed to is the same. Maybe the only difference is, essentially what they experience or how things are digested in that moment in particular. Um, so I mean, like, I just feel like we have to be very careful about not about missing out on educating from a good age by thinking that we shouldn't try to teach people things at a younger age, but maybe just find a way to dilute it. Like I can't remember having a coloring book that had the cartoon Shaka Zulu, for example.
Right.
Doesn't have to be the six-pack guy throwing spears, blood spewing out. It could just be like, let's paint the picture like in a nice, how they draw cartoons with the big guys and he's
Right.
holding like a miniature and it's
Um,
like, hey.
it's it's really interesting because like my younger brother is 11, and like he's a sensitive kid. So one of the books that they're reading for school is The Boy with the Striped Pajamas,
Ooh.
and
Oof.
he's finding it very difficult to read. Like he gets upset. But my brother's also the kid who at like 7 years old, like when did Queen of Katwe come out? Yeah, like when he was 7, we went to go watch like Queen of Katwe um at the movies because we were like, let's rep Uganda Queens, we go
Yeah.
whatever. And like there's the scene where the baby almost gets washed away from by the heavy rains and the flood. But him just seeing like a child in distress and knowing that the child could almost die, like he was kind of just like, nope. Like the scene wasn't even long. It was like maybe a minute. My brother to this day won't watch Queen of Katwe. He's like, that's a horror movie. It's scary. I don't like it. And I'm just like, what? But no, okay, I do say word, but it's what I'm realizing is that we do need to teach our children history, and we do, and kids 100% have the ability to have complex conversations. I've been rewatching Hey Arnold, and it's very clear that Helga's mom is an alcoholic. Like it's
Yep.
100% clear that she's an alcoholic, and but they don't say that. So they do portray in the like the media that we watch like kids with difficult backgrounds. I when I was a kid, I loved the History Channel and whatever. Maybe at a slightly younger or a slightly younger age than my brother, and like I remember reading Good night, Mr. Tom. But I found it really interesting because I was just like, oh, war happened. Like, this is what happened to kids. So I was intrigued by it, but my brother, I think, is triggered by it. And and so when we're talking about individual kids, it's really easy for us to say, well, this kid should have more knowledge. But when you're when you're actually working in a classroom environment, there's so many other factors that come into play. And parents also have like such a big they're very watchful. I mean, even think about sex. Like we can say, guys, comprehensive sex education needs to be had at school, blah 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 blah. Say now you're a teacher and you you decide that this is what you want to do. There's 30 kids in the class. You don't know who's being sexually assaulted in that class. You don't know if you're triggering anyone in that way. You don't know about the backgrounds. You don't know about their religious backgrounds, what is taboo, what is not taboo, what what conversations might have happened at home, what might not have happened at home. How do you not alienate somebody who, at 16 you can be not ready to have sex or not wanting to do anything and find it like incredibly what is it you could find it like incredibly vulnerable, like having that conversation with your teachers, with your peers, and it could feel really unsafe. How do you cater to that kid compared to somebody else who might be 16, very sexually confident, had multiple sexual partners, feels like they have a lot of agency, and maybe wants to go deeper into those conversations? How are we really expecting a teacher to hold all of that with children?
That's a good question. I think I don't know how a teacher can do it. I think it's difficult for me to speak from the perspective of an educator because one, I haven't really been trained in it, so I also don't understand the intricacies of what they need to do. I mean, the things you popped up, some of the things that you actually mentioned, that some are some things I've never thought about. When I look at it from that perspective. I think I think another educator said to me once that the raising of a child, a child is always raised by the village. That's something that our ancestors and ourselves always believe. And I think the village doesn't necessarily. I was actually saying to someone the other day because I thought I was talking about a literal village, but it's a figurative thing where the village can also be your primary your educators, your cousins, your friends, your principal, your whoever. These people are part of your unique village. So I think the comprehensive learning of a child comes from all those avenues. The primary main feeders of education in that particular aspect is obviously it will be the parents and it'll be the educator. But now you bring another thing up that's quite interesting to say that now what of the one pillar, which is the parentals, there's abuse, there's lack of support, there's whatever. See, the lecturer doesn't necessarily know that. So just to emphasize and not go in circles. I mean, you are right. It's very difficult to accommodate that, but I just feel like, watch my words. Maybe we need to look at finding what works the best, or maybe having the tough conversation about what and backed by empirical data, of course. Maybe you can't just do things for the sake of doing it. What's the worst evil in terms of how kids should be brought up? Because we're seeing that the lack of exposure, the lack of experience. I look at some of my successors, like my nieces, my nephews, etc., in terms of how they are and where they are, and kind of how they build things. They're very intelligent, but there's a huge component that's missing, and it's a linkage to what was. It's kind of just like what's happening and where they're going, and it's kind of like a little bit of a gap between where they're from. And obviously, I'm not expecting a 10-year-old, 8-year-old to be like, man, my predecessors, traveled from the west of Africa and then migrated to South Africa, and then we because I mean, if I have to look at myself, a lot of this I learned as an adult, because there's other things. It's almost like you have to go through certain poles to kind of connect certain dots. It's not like you can just go all the way to the end to be like, okay, now I know who I am, or I understand my identity. It's always a journey. But anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you say?
But yeah, because but I was also gonna say like, but it's also good to remember like what your thought process was during that time. Like my parents have wanted like to teach me about like Baganda culture because we're Ugandan and all of this, but like from a young age, I was just like, yo, we have a funny surname. People are messing up my surname. No one speaks Luganda here. I was just like, I don't. I was like, I don't want to associate with this. This doesn't make sense to me. And when we went to Uganda, there were things. Now I'm like, I love this. Da da
Ish.
da. Like,
Yeah.
but like when I was little, I was just like, you know what, guys? Actually, this doesn't look like Cape Town.
I just want to play with my friends.
No, like when I had to use a long job for the first time, I was like, so I'm not gonna go home and I'm not gonna go back to school and tell them I was using a long job. I don't understand why they're mosquitoes. Obviously, there are other things that were really great about Uganda, but the thing is, like in my mind, that's what I associated with it. So I was like,
100%.
I'm not going to go back to Cape Town and have to explain everything to the people around me and then them laugh at me because everything is so different. Even the traditional dress was different. So I was just like, I don't want to wear busuti. I was like, get that material, get that style away from me. And that's also a certain logic. Like we forget that kids also have logic. Like,
Yeah.
you're looking into your nieces and nephews and saying, oh, why don't they know about their culture? Some of it could be because maybe you guys as a family excuse didn't do the work, but they also could be choosing. At 10 years old, at 8 years old, you can choose. You can literally be like, I don't want anything to do with it, and there's nothing that people can do to make you want to learn.
Word. Word. Man, like, as kids, and I'm playing, but man, we were such brats, man. But I guess it's one of those things because I think you also don't want to strip the innocence of a child. And it's very tricky. I think every child, obviously, once again, every child is also very different. So a blanket approach doesn't work. Um, and yeah, and I think maybe I should actually take the time, and this is why I like talking about these things sometimes in public, because sometimes in my learning experience, some of my best learning experience comes from soundboarding with others. So now, like for example, from our conversation, what I can say I've derived in particular is some of the points you brought up about what educators go through in terms of the complexities of each child in the room. And also, I have to think about the fact that it is difficult to speak if you've never been a parent too. I think I've always been an advocate around you can always have an opinion of something outside of your own experience, but if you've never really been in that experience, it's really difficult to detail what could be done, what the result would be, how a child really is when they are yours. Sometimes when you handle your nephew and your niece, you're like, oh, come here, and then they listen to you. And I was like, wow, this ain't so bad. And so you have your own. There's poop in the nails. They ain't letting you sleep. And when they get older, they start defying. You're like, no, I'm done. I'm done reading. No, no, I want to play. you know. So maybe what I should, from my side, maybe what I need to be doing a bit more is maybe just looking into getting myself ready for those situations because it is like a situation when you're raising somebody. I think it's a situation where you can read as much as you want, but the real learning happens on the job. So maybe just prepare yourselves around, reading a bit more about how kids think, the psychology around kids, psychology around other people, maybe the psychology of you being a person looking after someone and kind of use that as a learning tool to somewhat prepare yourself as best as possible. Because unless you have kids, maybe you don't really know.
Bruh, I'm not ready for kids.
Yep, nope, sure.
Uh, you know,
Nah.
what trips me out about kids is this idea that like there's so much that you have to like throw away when you become a parent, and you realize that there are hopes and dreams that you have for your children that you didn't know. I'm pretty sure it's like that. I know that because my parents had my brother, yeah, like 11 years ago. So I was 18. So I guess I was like, I was definitely old enough to be like a mother. But I like, watching him grow, like sometimes I'd see my brother and just be like, man, why does he do it this? Why does he do this thing this way? Like, why can't he just do it this way? And I felt myself really just wanting to share that with him so that he could grow up and live in a particular, in a particular way. I'm sure you do that with your cousins too. Then you had to realize like, oh, part of loving someone, and when you truly say you have to let them be their own person, I was like, this was hard. I'm like, you are just my brother. Like, you're not my kid. What would happen if this was my kid?
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually wild. I do that with my cousins.
Yeah, and like I said, it's dreams and stuff that you didn't even think that you had, right? Because in your head you're just like, I'm big cousin or I'm uncle or whatever, and I'm just a supportive person. Like, of course I back you. But then they do things and you sit there and you worry and you go to the parents and you're like, man, I'm worried about this kid. Why are you worried? There's probably nothing wrong with this kid, but just because they've done something that's a little bit different, or you can foresee some sort of difficulty in their future, we kind of want to like to like manage and to we want to get involved. And so this process and this thing that we keep telling people of like letting go is, you realize, is so much harder than you first anticipated.
It's bloody difficult. And it's just because of that emotional and spiritual part of it, a component of it as well. It's so complex, that desire to want to hold on to someone for the sake of their benefit, maybe their benefit, forgetting that it's also to your benefit as well to some extent. But to let them go to be their own is also fear. It's fear of what could go wrong by letting go. And that comes in so many components in love, in particular, for another human being. It's wild.
So much of our life is like managing people, and like you think you'd get better, but it's like every couple of months, like you're thrown in something and you're like, damn,
is that right?
Maybe I do. You're like, maybe I do have control issues, or damn, maybe I don't check in that much. Damn, maybe.
Well, I mean, look, the number one thing I've learned, and it's the one thing I'm going to teach my kids and anyone in life in general, and I have been doing it. For me, the biggest lesson I've learned in terms of being an adult is that, one, they lie to me. Two, the older you get, the harder it gets. It's that simple. It's like that's it. Don't have to complicate it. Don't have to deep dive. Oh no, but what about life? Things get nicer, more money, maybe. No, the older you get, the harder it gets. It's just I apply that as a blanket approach. Getting more money, more problems. Less money, more problems. Yeah. No family, problem still. Family, problem still. So you can't run away from it. Life is a battle. It's a journey. It's a trip. It's in everything. So it just maybe it gets easier if you one day just decide to like play the lotto and you win 1 billion rands, and then you just buy an island and you just like drink coconuts for the rest of your life. Maybe, but that doesn't happen. So,
no, I mean, it gets easier in some aspects, but it gets like more complicated on the other. Yeah. Like I do feel like I care less about what people think in some aspects, but then I care more in other aspects. Like there's no like balancing of the scales. Like I can feel more confident about myself and like how I look. I think like we all get to a point where we're just like, I guess it is what it is. Like, you see, who I am is who I am. But then you get this whole thing of like, how do I build my professional circle? How do I make sure that I can sustain myself? What does it mean to be part of a family? What does it mean to set healthy boundaries? Why do these relationships need maintenance? Why are we all changing? Why aren't we changing at the same pace? Like, it just, it's trippy. Oh, and then also like, I don't know about you, but have you felt like when you, as you get older, you need to kind of like tie yourself more to a kind of way of living? I don't know if you are religious, so religion plays part of it, but I mean, before this live started, we were talking about like money
Mm-hmm.
and who should earn in a relationship, and I was telling you that, for some women, I think but maybe not not only women, but for some people, they take the philosophy, which is men in general earn more than women and have more earning capacity in this capitalist system than women, and therefore men should be spending the money. But I feel like that kind of decision, it was really made from like in a kind of feminism, right? So they're like, if I believe in this system, I'm going to apply this system to my life. And I feel like as I get older, I'm kind of like, cool, I can say I'm against whatever, gender based violence. Then I will sit and be like, how do I create systems in my life that um, don't support, violence against, against vulnerable people? Or if I say, cool, I'm anti-capitalist, I don't say that. But if I say I'm anti-capitalist, right? How am I working against the system? What are what are the communities that I'm tied into? How is that reflective in the kind of processes and the projects that I want to put out into the world? How am I embodying this practice? I think like as I get older, I'm kind of like really sitting down with myself and being like, yo, you can't just say things for the sake of being like woke or topical or have an opinion about it. You're at the age now where you really have decision making power. That's also the creepy thing about growing up though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you never feel like you're the one. You know how we would look at people in their 40s and be like, oh my gosh, they just don't want the new people to like make decisions. But that's because I'm realizing that sometimes it takes up until you're 40 for you to finally get that dream position. Anyway, that's a story for another day. But like really just thinking, hey, I'm old enough to make decisions and whatnot, which means that I need to live to my ideals. Like that is something that's been like really tripping me up, or something that I'm constantly thinking about lately.
No, you're right. I think maybe to answer your first question and bleed it into what you said now. I don't consider myself. I no longer consider myself a religious person, and that's merely because I think what leaving the country for a couple of years did for me was it exposed. I don't. To be fair, actually, let me call myself out. I don't think I was that religious even before, but I became a lot less after I left because I started to understand the origins of the society and the ideologies of what I believe or what I've been taught to believe really are and where they come from through reading as well as through experience of meeting other people from different places. So I learned quite early that not early. I learned in my travels and probably more towards post graduation probably that a lot of what I've been told and taught about the world and how things are and what is right and what is wrong is completely false, as well as it's not necessarily true. And I felt like what I've been taught and taught to believe, rather, is someone's opinion or a group of people's opinions. So I started to realize that, you know what? In actuality, even though I've been taught these things, whether it's capitalism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's whatever it may be, um, it might not necessarily be wrong, but as you said, I'm in a situation where I'm older now. I can kind of dissect things a little bit more, and I should really stand by what I believe in. So if somebody says to me that being a Christian is the right way of life, there's nothing wrong with me of saying, yeah, you're right. But if I'm gonna say I'm right, I need to also take the responsibility of being able to justify, not to other people, but being able to justify to myself undelusionally as to why I believe this is the right way of life. And for example, nothing is perfect, so also to be able to acknowledge the deficiencies, or unbuckle the bias around the things that I love and like, and which a lot of people don't. So in particular with the root of religion, for example, I started to understand that first and foremost, it's not even an African concept necessarily in terms of modern the common religions, not religion itself, but the common religions. So I was like,
Yeah,
wow,
the Abrahamic.
huh?
No, I said the Abrahamic religion. So Muslim,
Correct,
if so,
correct.
Islam, Judaism,
Hebrew,
Christianity. Yeah.
yeah. Judaism, sorry, not Hebrew, Judaism. Yeah. So I mean, I even learned. So even before I left, I mean, I actually studied world history. I don't know why, but I chose to do not as a major, but it was like one of the courses that I did. And in that course, it
Mm-hmm.
was the first time I learned about the Abrahamic religions. I was like, and it really, excuse my language, but it really fucked me up for a minute. I was like, wait a minute. So you've got the you have these Christians who hate on the what you call it, the Muslims, and then
Mm-hmm.
who also hate on people who believe in Judaism, and they all kind of hate on each other, and they've all hated on each other and fought with each other, but they come from the same place. I was just like, nah, you know what? Y'all niggas, y'all never told me this when I was growing up. I thought when I was growing up, these were islands apart. We were at war. We were right. They were wrong. And blah blah. And I was just like, wow, what else is wrong about the world? And then that's when you start really starting to dissect things a little bit more, and you're like, what? Capitalism? This is what it is? What? Feminism? This is what it is? What? Patriarchy? Agency? I'm like, damn. Y'all lied to me, or y'all never even told me this growing up. You told me to get a degree, get married, live a good life, build your family, and then life should be good. I'm like, that's not even the story. It's not even, it's like it's one part of the story, and it's not even the complete picture. So as I've grown into myself more, I've started to question more, because I feel like we, as human beings, we love to believe in something. We love, in unison, we love to believe in something. So whether it's different religions, different cultures, whether it's being patriotic, whatever it is, we like to cluster ourselves to have a sense of belonging. So I've started to realize that in that false, not false, in that created perspective and reflection of life, we're not necessarily taught the truth behind what we are. It's kind of just like, for example, some of the things in our cultures as Africans as well. We've always done this because this is how it's done. Some of the things are not necessarily challenged, or whatever it is already not even challenged, explored or understood further. So just to kind of run it down or sum it up, that's kind of my journey. I've started to question things more, because I need to understand a little bit more of the context to be like, why am I praying to Jesus? You know, who is Jesus? Um, why do we say that it is this and like that? Why is it that I can't go to, or rather, why don't I go to temple? Why can't I go there? Or why all these things that we're not necessarily told, but it's ingrained into us. And maybe I want to use that as an opportunity to ask you a question around your heritage being from Uganda. What's your what's your experience, or what's your journey been? Because you spoke about as a child, it's kind of like, no, it's not Cape Town, and you've now grown into like, but this is part of who I am. So what has really kind of been your journey about finding yourself? And maybe I'm being presumptuous, because you didn't necessarily say it in those words, but in terms of finding yourself in the shoes of being a Ugandan woman. Maybe you can just expand upon that a little bit.
I mean, I think there's still so much I don't know about like my culture and stuff, and I think it's not that I don't want to know, but I think why I identify as Ugandan is because for me, I like the idea of Ooh, I know this idea is problematic for a lot of people, but I like the idea of lineage, and I really enjoy the idea of being placed somewhere. Um, I like going to Uganda and having people who look like me. I like the fact that they can see my mother in me. I like the fact that they can, like, I look like my aunts, and like I look like my cousins. I look like my other cousins. I like the fact that like they see me and they're like, oh, Victor's daughter. So I really enjoy this, like, a sense of really being known but not known in a way that I was never. I never had that experience in South Africa, and so I think for me, part of like going back to Uganda and calling myself Ugandan is this sense of home, but home really in tied to like family and tied to like culture and traditions. These ideas that there were traditions that my family have done and like doing together, and once you partake in it, you are one of them, you know.
Word.
And so yeah, I mean, as I go older, I realize that it's messy. Like, you know, now when I go back and like you hear stories or you like sit with people, you're just like, oh, okay. So actually having your aunts and uncles and cousins around or whatever, they're family. Like, it's tricky because I get to fly in and out. So I get to go there for the nice things. I'm like, oh, it's wedding time.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but for me, that's really been a thing about like learning my culture and whatnot. And like when I do hear about my you know how big my family is, like there is a sense of pride, because I think there's a for me, it's a thing of being seen. I really just feel seen. When I go to Uganda, I feel seen, whatever that means. Whether it's they know me because of my mom or my dad, or they know me because of my grandparents, that idea that like you being there matters, and if you disappeared, it would be a thing, like people would show up because your life mattered. I feel like I don't feel it here in SA because we're just a tiny family. We're just 5 people.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe just so there's a two-parter I want to ask as well, just in that same context, but also in the South African context as well. So you know, this month is Women's Month. So just I should have actually asked it off as the second question, but it doesn't matter. It's Women's Month now. As a Ugandan woman, as someone, because you're an African woman. Sorry, let me just say you're an African woman. Um, what's your take, your feeling during this time of Women's Month? And you know, you being an African woman, you know, and your plight. You specifically, you know, and not necessarily like a specific story, but you know, like where are your thoughts around this matter in particular?
About Women's Month. Women are dope. Women are dope. African women are dope. Black women are dope. In particular, I'm really thinking about how we expand our definition of woman and womanhood, to include people who don't fit neatly into those into what we, you know, into common definitions, so intersex or trans women or non-binary people. That's where I'm at with Women's Month. And also I've been talking to people, like a cousin of mine. She was feeling like, what makes a woman? And I told her what makes her a woman is you identify as a woman. You know, and I also found out that she has a condition where she doesn't ovulate, you know, and I also have a condition where I don't ovulate because I have premature ovarian failure. And I was just like, you see, those are things that people don't want to talk about. And just because you have like breasts and like a vag or whatever, people want to be like, there's still women within us who have those external features like us, but there are certain things that we can't do that are apparently markers of womanhood, but we retain our rights to call ourselves women, but deny other people the right to identify as women, even when they have similar markers, you know? And so that's really where I'm at right now in terms of like Women's Month. There are more women around than we are aware of.
Women are the majority in the world population in general, and however you decide to depict that from every fact, whether you're talking about from biological, or you're talking about self-identification, women are around us. I always say that women are everything because, for me, there's no life without women. And I don't necessarily literally mean giving birth. I mean that's part, but I literally mean everything else. There is no life without women. There's lack of purpose. There's lack of meaning. There's lack of beauty. There's lack of a lot of things without women, and um, not to because I think I said this last week more or less. As I gotten older, as I was saying now, identifying, questioning, understanding a bit more, it also saddens me. I think the past 2 3 years in particular, it saddened me because I've started to also now not debunk, depict, and decrypt what I've always thought was a good person, a good man, and also the plight of women in general. Like, we have no clue. So I mean, like I always say, I try to say to my female friends, and the women who know me, please, it's not your job to hold us accountable. But if you ever see us and we're trying, and I'm trying to, let me not speak for other men. Actually, for heck, let me speak for myself. If you ever see me, if you ever see me straying from the path, I am trying. Please always feel free to call me out. As well as, there's an educational moment, I would love to have it. And then maybe just going into the second question. Coming back to Africa, why do you think there's not one Africa? And I know it's very complex. It's very complex. We could sit here for hours to like go debunking why Africa's not one. But if you just to throw some themes as to why do you think we're not united? And maybe also talk to why South Africans are full of it sometimes. Sometimes.
Um, because trying to keep a whole network of people together is complex. Look at how we've just spoken about families. Like I realized, like my parents, like on my mom's side, like she's close with her cousins and stuff, but that's because her dad, well, he had like 5 6 siblings, but they were all close, and so their families would hang out together.
Yeah.
But now people are trying to keep those together, which was my parents' generation. But all of them, because you have 6 kids, and those 6 kids then all have 4 or 5 children. So now they're like 20 of them. Then they all got married and they had kids, which is us. So now you have like 60 people who are all related, and that's just like from like that one little split, right? Like families in themselves are complicated. A whole continent is a lot. It's very much so. Yeah, America is not all united, and I'm not saying it because in America. I'm just saying there are very few places where people are united as one, especially like if you're talking about like entire population. How big is the African population?
Hey.
That's wild. I don't think it's possible. Do we even have like cities in the world that are all one? Right? I mean, like Cape Town itself has 4 million.
Yes.
I didn't know. I can't imagine all 4 million of us thinking as one. So I don't know. I think it's a concept, like it sounds nice, but in like actual practical stuff, I think it's easier for people to, I don't know, like find little enclaves like they do on the internet. You find your group. I don't know if I answered your
You
question.
did, you did. You actually ironic, not ironically. I don't know why I like shouting out. Ironically, um, I think it's from reading a lot of Shakespeare and we were like, what is the irony? What is the irony? What is the irony? Um, you've said you've said something that I haven't heard. I've never heard someone explain it like that. It's normally like, oh, corruption, oh, greed, oh. But what you say is actually an interesting point. You know how managing a family itself is really difficult. So now imagine putting together a full-on network of African countries. You know, and where some of these countries are still colonized in a way. You know, they're still kind of linked to different things, especially the Franco phone countries. Um, so yeah, it's like,
No, but
hmm?
we're all like still looped into the system. Like I was telling my friend who is Kenyan, like she was, I was telling because she's a creative, and she was like, yeah, it's hard for us here, and I was like, yeah, it's hard for y'all. I'm like, it's hard for y'all, but I'm like, y'all are being positioned as like this tech hub. So I'm like, when people profile the continent, it's always like it's South Africa, it's Nigeria, and it's Kenya. So I'm like, y'all are getting resources that like Ugandans aren't getting, that Tanzanians aren't getting. I'm
Mm,
not saying that means that like I'm not saying that
no, no, I get you.
more support can't happen, but you guys are the privileged ones on the continent. Just like South Africa must shut up sometimes and understand that you are the favorite child,
We are
like in
last
in
born.
in a lot of little structures. So yes, you are more developed, but that's also because more funding and support is put here and has been put here consistently. And so yes, we are struggling, but when there are opportunities to do cool things, they call South Africa as like a bastion of ideas. Like this is where people wanted to like start off like the African Silicon Valleys, and this is why we have all these um what do you guys call them, angel funders, and people who are coming out here to like invest money in Tesla and all of that. Like you can look down at the rest of Africa and be like, why aren't they here? But understand that the people who are highlighting South Africa are like the Germans and the British,
Yeah.
Americans.
No, no, you're right. I mean, I remember, and if I'm spouting out non-factual information, I apologize. But I remember we were our president was put under pressure when I think we were still when America was having issues with Iran recently, the most recent ones, and they were putting some pressure from us. So I think we get some of our oil from Iran, and it was just like, are we really independent? Are we really, like it's kind of that type of thing where it's like you're right. South Africans have to shut up because um, I actually feel like South Africa has a lot of mannerisms of the West more than any. I haven't really traveled a lot in Africa, but I've traveled a little bit, and from what I've seen as well, like it's not that great. Yeah, I mean, it's great. It is great. Like like the standard of living and stuff. What you can do here and the opportunity to do certain things. It's really great, and the infrastructure, cool. But I mean, like I think South Africans, it would be great if it could be really like cheaper. I know it's not easy to do that, but if it would be really like inexpensive for people to travel within different African countries. And now I'm speaking specifically as a South African. I think if South Africans could travel the continent more, and if it was cheaper, because I think I debated with someone, they were saying, "Yeah, it's quite cheap." I'm like, no, it's not that cheap. Like to travel to, I mean, maybe like Kenya and stuff, Nigeria, because they actually brought those up. But those are, like you said, those are the favorite hubs. So obviously there will be more frequent flights. It'll be cheaper. It'll be whatever. So I mean, to travel to Congo, I'm sure it's not that cheap. To travel to Niger, I'm sure it's not that cheap. And we don't know much about it. Like an example I used to somebody is that as a South African, as an African, even today, I will admit it into the public. I don't even know the name of the capital of Mauritius. Like I'm not saying we must know everything, and I mean not everybody knows everything. I'm just saying like I'm pushing to your point that we were very privileged a lot of times, and we fail to see it. But we can still do a lot more in terms of bettering our knowledge about the rest of the continent, even if we don't have to travel there. You know, 'cause some people might never leave South Africa their whole lives. But if you can get an opportunity to Google, what does Uganda look like? What does Nigeria? What does Ghana look like? Or Cameroon? What do they speak? What's the capital? You know, you'll get to see a little bit of a difference there. Hmm?
I mean, Africa is expensive as hell.
It's
It's
expensive as hell, bruh.
like a round trip from like here to UG and back is like
Don't say it.
8-10K. But like that's how much you can pay to go to like London.
Oh, yeah. And the Netherlands and Dubai, which are
Right? It's the
further.
same amount. It's the same amount, and you're just like but it's so much closer. But the messed up part is like yeah, it's cheap. It like or it costs the same to get like a flight to Europe. But once you're in Europe, you can't afford nothing because
Huh.
that damn exchange rate will kill you out here at the
130%.
coffee shop. Right? You're like, hey, I remember like when I went to Austria, like the flights were long, so I'm like, yo, let me grab something to eat. So I'm like, let me get a pretzel and like coffee or whatever, and it's damn near like $100, and you're like, it was $100 to get a pretzel
Snacks.
and like, a, luckily I was on a conference or whatever, so like they paid for everything. It's just that I had to like sort myself out, like if I was hungry on the way, and I
Yeah.
was just like, this is not sustainable.
Mm, it's not. For
It's
real.
not. It's not cute. Mm-mm.
It's wild. But maybe I'm just being careful of my mindful of time. We should be ending, but I want to ask one question that I was holding on to, and you brought it up earlier, and I was quite excited about it. Um, talk to us about cartoons, anime, and this war of perception that it's childlike, it's for kids, people who don't want to grow up. Let's talk about it. Let's
But
debunk.
about
Let's debunk the myth.
okay, well, firstly, I'm gonna say that I really enjoy watching cartoons, and I think it's got to do with this idea of abstraction. I think the world is too much. Like my timeline and the people that I talk to are really involved in like social justice issues. So if like
It's heavy.
my timeline is all filled, yeah, it's extremely heavy. People are always talking about, let's talk about the rent strike, let's talk about the DA government, let's talk about evictions in South Africa, let's talk about kids not going to school, let's talk about gun violence, let's talk about gender-based violence, let's talk like I have all these perspectives flying at me all of the time, and I'm trying to navigate like my positionality there, that sometimes most of the times I don't want to see humans. So like when I have time to like be by myself, I don't want to like watch your Ozarks or your Money Heist or even your silly like Big Bang Theories. Cartoons make more sense to me, and often I cry. Like I would watch Steven Universe. Steven Universe is amazing. I think Steven Universe is like a great allegory for like what it means to grow up as what were we called? The Yeah, we were like the Rainbow Nation kids. What's our
Born
moniker?
free.
But like yes, the Born Freeze. I don't know if you watch Steven Universe, but this whole idea that he like his mother was a crystal gem, basically like a freedom fighter, but he never got to meet her, and now he has to
Mm,
kind of like carry on her legacy. But like as he's navigating and learning about how to be this crystal gem, he's also realizing that like maybe his mother's path, like maybe she wasn't as good as people thought she was. Maybe she had some selfish motives for even gaining for even being involved in the fight. And you get to navigate that along with him. But it's a kids show. The same with Avatar. Avatar is now it's on USA Netflix, but it's on Showmax here. I've been watching that with my family. Really deep issues too. Talking about legacy again, talking about legacy, talking about nationhood, talking about like what happens when you have entire generations that have caused damage to other populations and other families, and how do you take that on, and do we crucify everyone that comes from there? So basically, are all Fire Nation people essentially bad? And Avatar's like, no, they're not. It's just like this one family, and like how do you then restore kind of like pride or a sense of understanding with this whole, I guess, legacy of people. I hope I'm making sense. So Avatar, I mean, that's really cool, but I mean, it can also be as simple as like, I really like Craig of the Creek, which is new. Craig is black, and he's got a black family, and it's just really cute and wholesome to have this little boy who plays in the creek and is really good at drawing maps, and really then is like the secret holder of the creek. He's got like his two white friends, they're cool and whatever. Like his older brother is also dating a white girl. So I mean, like, it's a mixed class and stuff, but that's really dope. What else do I watch? Man, yeah, I'm rewatching Hey Arnold. I rewatched As Told by Ginger.
Classics.
You know. Kipo and the Wonder Beasts on Netflix. Kind of an anime style, but really dope. My friend who's a comic book creator from Zim, he was just like, "Faye, it's really black." Afterwards, he was like, "It's really black," but it's true. Like Kipo is because he was like, "Faye, mixed black, emo black, gay black, like downtrodden black." It's a really dope show with people who have been trapped underground because there are mutants, like animal mutants, giant animal mutants that live on the top of the earth.
Hey, wait a minute. Wait, what's the name of the show?
Kipo and the Wonder Beasts.
You know what that sounds like? And I challenge you to watch it, and I'm about to get caught out also. So there's this anime. Oh my gosh, why don't I remember the name? Fact check, but it has a similar plot. Has a similar plot line. But one of my best friends and I, we always used to watch this thing several times. Like obviously it's one season. Sometimes some of these animes only like 123 episodes. And man, phenomenal. But it was a similar story in the beginning where they live underground because on top of the world, like it's these beasts and these whatever things. So they just live this underground life until they realize that actually they've been lied to, and what's actually above the surface is just another whole world, and people have just been living underground. Come on, drill. And if my friend is watching, he's gonna say, "What kind of friendship is this?" Drill the universe. I'll tell you now. It's gonna come to me. It's gonna come to me. It's gonna come to me. Tengen Topa Guren Lagen. So Guren Lagen. I'll type it out for you. So I beg you. I'm going to take your recommendations tonight, and I'm actually gonna go watch the last. It's not called The Last Airbender. It's just called Avatar, right? The movie was The Last Airbender, I think. So I'm gonna watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna I don't think I watched the whole of Avatar, so I'm gonna go watch it. I want you to watch Gurren Lagann. For me, it's a phenomenal piece of art, and the amount of trauma and the amount of character development, and it's only like 23 episodes and like 20 minutes each, but there's a lot of things that happen throughout: loss, tragedy, love, prosperity, jealousy, defeat, failure, success, all crafted into one piece of art. But yeah, I mean, look, anyone listening in, I think everybody has their own preferences, right? So I think there are just some people who have that thing as Kitty Popeye, you know, as cartoons. when it's for kids, fine. But I just think that don't judge it because it's one of. I feel like cartoons, anime, and a lot of these different forms of crafted arts have a story to tell in a manner that some people can actually feed on. Sometimes when you deny your kids the ability to actually tune into some of these things, they get to miss out on a lot of the lessons that you're trying to actually instill into them, but it's not really sinking in. Like I took a lot of lessons for some animes, from Naruto to some of the other stuff. Obviously not the unrealistic things, but like the fundamental uh, message and what happens in the actual story itself. So yeah, and I've actually just back to what you were saying as well. Like life is hectic, work is hectic. There's a lot of demands. There's growing up. There's bills. There's all these things. And even now, like when I look at my behavior on Netflix in particular, I've just really been looking for light watches, because everything else is so intense. So I'm just looking for cartoons, animes, light shows that are like 20, 30 minutes, comedies. Like that's just where I'm at in my life right now. Guys, growing up, it's not fun, but it's an adventure. So take it as you will. Faye, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining us today. I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. Um, I'm very excited about how we ended it. I know everything else matters, guys, but man, the last part really got to me because I'm passionate about that. But to everyone in the world, much love to you. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week, same time, same place.